She pressed her palm against the cold bronze seal of the Hell-Gate Tribunal, not knowing the court had already been convened for 3 days. The year was 1173, and the woman standing in the shadows of the mountain pass was named Sara, a mother whose daughter lay bleeding in a village that had no physician, no priest, and no sanctuary left standing. She had come to the edge of the known covenant, beyond the prayers of her ancestors, to a place where the soil itself had been cursed by generations of broken oaths. The air smelled of sulfur and wet stone, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a sound like iron chains dragged across a dry riverbed told her she was not alone. Here's what the scrolls don't tell you about the gates of hell. They do not look like furnaces or pits of fire. In the high passes of the Anatolian mountains, where the old temples of Baal still stood in ruin, hell's entrance was a cleft in the rock, no wider than a woman's shoulders, sealed by a door that bore no handle on the outside. The elders of her village had warned her never to walk this path after sunset. They said the wind that blew from that cleft carried the voices of souls who had traded their covenant for a single night of love. But Sara's daughter had been struck by a fever that turned her blood to water, and the nearest healer was a full day's journey south. She had 3 hours before the moon rose, and the deal she was about to make would cost her everything she had not already surrendered. You know what it means to arrive at a place where heaven has already gone silent. The prayers you repeated since childhood suddenly feel hollow against your teeth, like stones you have chewed too long. Sara had prayed until her voice cracked. She had lit every oil lamp in her home and placed them before the icon of the Virgin that had belonged to her grandmother. But the fever did not break. The daughter's breaths grew shallower, and in the final hour, Sara heard a voice that was not her own whisper through the crack in the wall behind the hearth. It said, "There is a door, there is a price, there is a judge who accepts payment in blood." The demon did not appear to her as a serpent or a beast. When the door in the mountain cleft swung open, the figure that stepped out wore the face of a man she had loved 20 years before. A man who had died in a border war, whose body she had buried with her own hands. He looked exactly as he had on the morning he rode away, except for his eyes. His eyes were the color of cooled copper, and when he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the stones beneath her feet. He said her name, and the sound of it seemed to unlock something in her chest that she had sealed away since childhood. When her daughter is severely injured, a desperate mother makes a deal with a demon to save her, but the price will have to be paid in blood. That is the description that the platform gives you, stripped of context, flattened into a log line. What the platform does not tell you is that the demon who stood before Sara that night was once an angel assigned to the third choir of the dominions. His name, before the fall, was recorded in the celestial registers as Benaiah, meaning built by the Lord. He had been cast down not for rebellion but for refusal. He had refused to sing the hymn of God's judgment over a city he considered innocent, and his mercy became his condemnation. For 700 years he had wandered the desolate places, between heaven's light and hell's fire, collecting souls through contracts that he wrote himself. The contract he placed before Sara was written on parchment, made from the skin of an animal that had been sacrificed to Molech 3 centuries before. The ink was her daughter's blood, drawn from a wound Sara had not realized was bleeding until she saw the crimson smear on her own hand. The terms were 3. First, Sara would give her own name to the demon. Not her baptismal name, but the name her mother had whispered over her at birth, the name that angels use when they plead for her soul before the throne. Second, her daughter would live, but she would belong to neither heaven nor hell until her wedding night, at which point she would be claimed by the court that had sealed the contract. Third, the price for the daughter's temporary life was a wedding. Sara's daughter would marry Benaiah in Hell's court on her 21st birthday, and the ceremony would be officiated by a priest who had died excommunicated. Think of the weight of that name. Benaiah, built by the Lord, now writing contracts in blood. If you want to follow the thread of what happens when a fallen angel still clings to the protocols of heaven, then subscribe. Now watch what happens next, because this is the part most people miss when they hear stories about demonic contracts. The deal was not evil in its mechanics. It was lawful. Hell operates on a legal system that mirrors the old covenant,
Every signature, every seal, every witness is accounted for.
The demon Benaiah knew this because he had once stood before the throne of heaven and watched the books of life and judgment being written. He had memorized the protocols. When he presented the contract to Sara, he was not tricking her. He was giving her a choice that was genuine within the rules of the spiritual jurisdiction he now served. And Sara, desperate and exhausted, pressed her thumb into the ink and left her print next to the signature line. But before the contract sealed itself with a flash of green fire, something happened that neither the demon nor the mother had anticipated. The daughter, lying in the village house 3 miles away, opened her eyes. She had been unconscious for 2 days, her body racked with fever, her lips cracked and bleeding. But in the moment her mother signed the pact, the daughter sat up straight in her bed and spoke a single word. No! The word was not spoken in any language of the earth. It was a sound that had not been heard in the mortal realm since the morning stars sang together at creation. It was the name of the Messiah, spoken in a tongue that only the angels of the present still remember. The demon Benaiah felt the word travel through the bond of the contract, like a blade cutting a thread. He looked at Sara with something that could almost be called fear. "Your daughter still carries God's light," he said. "You did not tell me she was sealed at birth." And in that moment, Sara remembered what her grandmother had done on the 8th day after her daughter's birth. The old woman had taken the infant to a chapel that was not recognized by any church, a hidden sanctuary built into the root cellar of an abandoned mill. There, a priest with no name had marked the child's forehead with oil and whispered a blessing that Sara had never fully understood. That blessing was a seal, and that seal was the reason the demon's contract could not fully close. Here's what changes everything about this story. The seal was not just a blessing. It was a preemptive claim made by heaven itself, placed on a child who would one day become the target of a demonic marriage contract. The elders of the hidden church had known for generations that a soul would be born with a light so bright that even the gates of hell would covet it. They did not know when, or where, or to whom, but they were commanded to pray continually, to keep the oil consecrated, and to wait. And when Sara's grandmother brought the infant to that root cellar, the nameless priest wept because he recognized the light. He had seen it only twice before in his life. Once in the face of a dying martyr, and once in a vision of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. The daughter's name was Miriam. Not Mary, not Maria. Miriam, the same name as the sister of Moses, the prophetess, who led the women of Israel in dance after the crossing of the Red Sea. And like her namesake, Miriam carried a gift that heaven had not given to any woman since the days of the Exodus. She could see the spiritual realm as clearly as she saw the physical world. Since she was a child, she had spoken of angels standing in the corners of her room, of a man in white who sat at the foot of her bed when the fever came, of a fire that burned behind the icons but did not consume them. Her mother thought these were visions of a fevered mind, but the demon Benaiah knew better. He had been an angel. He knew the signs of a sealed soul. The marriage contract, according to Hell's law, required that the bride enter the ceremony of her own will. A coerced marriage has no legal standing in the infernal courts. This is the loophole that heaven left open in the fabric of spiritual law. And it is the same loophole that saved countless souls who were targeted by demonic covenants. The bride must say yes. She must stand before the court, look at her demon groom, and speak her consent in the presence of 3 witnessing spirits. Without that, yes, the contract dissolves, and the soul returns to the custody of heaven. But here is the problem. Miriam did not know she was sealed. She did not know that she carried God's light. And she did not know that a demon had been pursuing her soul since the moment of her birth. When she turned 18, the visions began to change. The man in white, who had sat at her bedside, began to fade, and in his place, she saw a figure whose face she could never quite remember after waking. He stood at the edge of her dreams, wearing the armor of a soldier she had never met. He spoke to her in a voice that made her chest ache with longing. He told her she was beautiful, that she was chosen, that he had been looking for her across centuries. This is the part where most people misunderstand how demons seduce the soul. They do not come with pitchforks and threats. They come as the answer to your deepest loneliness. Miriam had grown up in a village where every young man her age had died in the wars of the border lords. She was 18, and she had never been courted, never held a hand, never heard a voice that made her feel seen. The demon Benaiah knew this. He had been watching her since she was a child, noting every rejection, every moment of solitude, every prayer whispered into a pillow when no one was listening. He did not appear to her as a monster. He appeared to her as the man she had been waiting for. That is the strategy. The demon does not attack your walls. He becomes the one thing your walls were built to keep out. The soul that guards itself against threats is defenseless against tenderness. Subscribe so you do not miss how this covenant begins to unravel, because the invitation to belong is always the first thread pulled. If you have ever felt a presence that seemed too perfect, too patient, too eager to know your loneliness, leave the word Benaiah in the comments. And consider whether you have met a deliverer or a debt collector wearing the mask of your deepest ache. The first time she saw him clearly, she was washing clothes in the river. He stood on the opposite bank, and the sun was behind him, and she could not see his face, but she could see the outline of his shoulders and the way the light bent around him like it was trying to avoid him. He stepped into the water and walked toward her, and the river did not splash around his feet. He moved through it like a ghost through a wall. When he reached her, he knelt in the shallows and took her hand. His fingers were cold, but not unpleasantly so. Cold like the water of a deep well in summer. He said,
I needed you to hear this directly.
I have come to ask for your hand in marriage, and I will wait until you are ready to say yes. She had no way of knowing that the proposal had been sealed in a court that did not recognize the authority of the church. She had no way of knowing that her mother had signed a contract in blood 7 years before. She had no way of knowing that the demon kneeling before her was once an angel who had refused to sing a song of judgment. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she felt seen, and that feeling, more than any threat or promise, is the most dangerous weapon in Hell's arsenal. The elders of the hidden church felt the disturbance 3 villages away. There were 7 of them, men and women who had been chosen in infancy to guard the secret of the sealed soul. They had been praying, without ceasing, for 18 years, passing the vigil from one generation to the next. The nameless priest who had marked Miriam had died 7 years before, but before his death, he had written a letter to the remaining elders.
May God
He told them
forgive
that
me.
when the demon came to claim the bride, they would need to speak 3 words in the language of the seraphim. He did not tell them what those 3 words meant. He told them that the words themselves were a key, and that the key would unlock something in Miriam's spirit that even the demon could not close. The elders began their journey to the village during the night of the new moon, traveling by foot through terrain that had not seen rain in 3 years. They carried a clay jar containing the same oil that had been used to mark Miriam's forehead on the 8th day of her life. The oil had been consecrated by the Apostle Thomas himself, passed down through the centuries by a chain of hands that had never been broken. They did not know if the oil would work. They did not know if the seal would hold. But they had promised the priest of the hidden path that they would not let Miriam enter the marriage contract without hearing the truth.
I hear you.
Meanwhile, Miriam's dreams became more vivid. The demon Benaiah began to show her visions of a life she could have with him. He showed her a house built of stone, with a garden of flowers that bloomed even in winter. He showed her a child with her eyes and his smile. He showed her a future where she was never hungry, never cold, never lonely. But he did not show her the cost. He did not show her that the house was built on a foundation of souls. He did not show her that the garden was planted in soil soaked with blood. And he did not show her that the child was a vessel for a spirit that had been waiting since the first rebellion to be reborn in mortal flesh. The elders arrived at the village on the 3rd day. They found Sara first, sitting in the ashes of her hearth, her hair unbound and her hands trembling. She had not eaten since the night she signed the contract. The parchment had burned itself into her memory, every word of it etched behind her eyelids. She looked up when the elders entered her home, and she knew immediately who they were. Her grandmother had told her about them, but she had always dismissed the stories as superstition. Now she saw the clay jar, and her breath caught in her throat.
You
came too late, she
take.
whispered. He has
The
already
jar.
proposed. She has already accepted.
Please.
The wedding is set for the next full moon. But the eldest of the elders, a woman named Adina who was 93 years old and had been praying for this moment since she was a girl of 17, shook her head. "The wedding is set," she said, "but the church is not yet built. The priest is not yet appointed, and the bride has not yet heard the name of the one who sealed her." She held up the clay jar, and the oil inside it glowed with a light that was not fire. "The seal holds, because heaven does not break its promises. Your daughter was claimed by God before the demon ever wrote a word of that contract, and what hell has joined, heaven can still unbind." Adina's words hung in the air like smoke from a censer that would not dissipate. Sara looked at the clay jar, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. It was not hope. Not yet. It was the memory of hope, the shape of it, like the indentation left on a pillow after someone has risen from sleep. She reached out to touch the jar, but Adina pulled it back. "Not yet," the elder said. "The oil must be spoken over by the one who will carry it into the marriage chamber. That cannot be you. It cannot be me. It must be someone Miriam trusts with her life." You are likely asking yourself who could possibly hold that authority, given that Miriam's father had died in the border wars, given that her mother had signed a contract with a demon, given that every young man in the village had perished before reaching his 20th year. The answer lay in a person Miriam had not seen since she was 6 years old. Her aunt Yael, the sister of her father, who had left the village the night after the funeral and never returned. Yael had walked away because she had seen something in the smoke of the pyre that no one else had seen. She had seen the face of the demon who would one day come for her niece. Yael was living in a convent that no longer belonged to any recognized order, a community of women who had been cast out of their churches for refusing to stop praying for the dead. They believed that the prayers of the living could still reach souls trapped in the intermediate state, and the ecclesiastical authorities had labeled their practice heretical. But Yael knew the truth. The demon who had killed her brother had not just taken his life. He had taken his soul to an unnamed court, and Yael had been praying for his release every day for 18 years. Her prayers had not freed him, but they had kept him from being used as a witness in the marriage contract. And that small victory had prepared her for a much larger battle. The elders sent a messenger to the convent, traveling on a horse that had been blessed by 3 generations of priests. The journey took 2 days. When Yael received the message, she did not hesitate. She packed a single bag, a change of clothes, a small crucifix, and a fragment of a bone from her brother's body that she had kept hidden for years as a relic. She had never told anyone about the bone. She had taken it from the pyre when no one was watching, believing that if she kept a piece of his physical form, she could keep a thread of connection to his soul. Now she understood that the thread was about to be tested. While Yael traveled, the demon Benaiah continued his courtship of Miriam. He appeared to her every night in the garden behind her home, and each time he asked her the same question. "Are you ready to say yes?" And each time, Miriam hesitated. Something in her soul, something deep and unnamed, held her back. She did not know that the seal on her forehead was glowing faintly whenever he drew near. She could not see the light, but she could feel it, like a warmth spreading from her scalp down through her spine. It was the sensation of being held by someone she could not see. You can feel it too, can't you? That warmth that Miriam cannot name. The relic that Yael carries like a secret weapon. This is the moment where a thread becomes a lifeline, and you need to see what happens when that thread is pulled. Subscribe so you don't miss the unveiling of what the demon does next, and tell me in the comments, what do you think Miriam is feeling when she senses that glow? Protection or warning? The demon felt the seal too, and it angered him. He had been patient for 700 years. He had waited until cities rose and fell, while empires crumbled, while the blood of martyrs soaked the earth and was forgotten. He had not waited to be thwarted by a blessing, whispered over an infant in a root cellar. On the night before the full moon, he appeared to Miriam with a new intensity. His copper eyes burned, and his voice carried an edge she had not heard before. "Tomorrow night," he said, "you will stand before the court. You will give your answer. And if you refuse me, I will take your mother's soul in your place." That is the law of the contract. She signed it willingly, and her soul is collateral. Miriam felt the words like a physical blow. She had not known her mother had signed anything. The revelation cracked something open inside her, and she realized that the love she felt for this man, this creature of copper eyes and cold hands, was not real. It had been planted, cultivated, watered with loneliness and desperation. But even in that moment of clarity, she did not have the strength to refuse him, because his threat was not empty. She had seen her mother's face when she had arrived at the riverbank that first day. She had seen the shame, the fear, the hollow exhaustion. Sara was already dying, just slowly, as the contract drained the life from her body one day at a time. If Miriam refused, the drain would become an instant. The hidden church had prepared for this. The elders had spent centuries studying the legal structures of hell, mapping every loophole, every clause, every procedural constraint. They knew that a demon's word, once spoken aloud in the presence of a soul, becomes a binding testimony. And they knew that Benaiah had just committed a critical error. He had told Miriam the truth about her mother's collateral status, but he had not told her that the contract contained a second clause, one that he had hidden even from his own court. That clause stated that if Miriam entered the marriage of her own free will, she would not just become Benaiah's bride. She would become the vessel through which he would reclaim his place among the angelic order, not as a servant, but as a ruler. The wedding was set for midnight in the cleft of the mountain pass. The excommunicated priest had been summoned from a tomb where he had been buried alive for refusing to renounce his faith. The witness spirits had been pulled from the ranks of the fallen, 2 who had been cast out during the first rebellion, and 1 who had been human once, a woman who had sold her own daughter in a plague, year 4 centuries before. The court was assembled. The demon wore a robe of black silk that absorbed all light, and Miriam stood at the threshold, dressed in white, her forehead burning with the glow of the seal that her mother's grandmother had placed on her before she could speak. Yael arrived at the mouth of the pass, just as the moon reached its zenith. She was carrying the clay jar, the fragment of her brother's bone, and a prayer that had been passed down through her family for 11 generations. She did not enter the cleft. Instead, she knelt at the entrance and began to pour the oil, in a line across the ground, tracing a circle that enclosed the entire mountain pass. As the oil touched the soil, the ground began to tremble. The demon inside felt the boundary being established, and he understood what it meant. The marriage could only be completed if the ceremony took place in Hell's jurisdiction. The oil was consecrating the territory, pushing the boundary of the court out of Hell's claimed land and into the neutral ground of the living world. Miriam looked toward the entrance of the cleft and saw her aunt kneeling in the moonlight. She recognized her face, even after 12 years. And in that recognition, something shifted. The seal on her forehead blazed with a light so bright that the demon Benaiah took a step backward. The excommunicated priest, who had been standing ready with the ceremonial words of union, dropped his book and covered his eyes. The 3 witness spirits began to wail because they knew what was coming next. The 3 words that the nameless priest had written in his letter. The words that had been guarded by the hidden church for centuries. The first word, Elohim. It means God of all judgment. The second word, Shaddai. It means the one who is enough. And the third word, Adonai. It means the Lord, who owns every soul by right of creation. When Yael spoke the 3 words aloud, the oil on the ground ignited with a flame that was not hot. It was cold. Cold as the water of a deep well. Cold as the touch of the demon's hand. But it was a flame, nonetheless. And it consumed the boundary line, sealing the wedding party inside a circle that they could not break.